Yes, I can see you.
Hey,
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
hey.
Good
Hey,
evening, except for Ben. I guess it's good afternoon for you.
It is midday. It's
Midday.
exactly midday. Yeah.
Nice one.
Yeah.
So
How's it going?
today, yeah, good. Everybody okay?
Yeah, thanks for
All
having
good.
the
us
things
on.
considered.
Yeah.
Still here. Still here.
Yeah.
So
Somehow.
today, um, we have an actual subject for the talk because a few times in the past few episodes, the subject of live coding has come up, and we got quite a bit of questions about that. And I'm not an expert in the field at all. Uh, in fact, I don't know much about it. I kind of understand it, but the three people here with me are experts in the field, and so we're gonna talk about live coding and algo rave and tidal cycles. Um, and I should do a little shout out to the people in the chat. Um, if you're watching this on YouTube, then if you have any questions for us, anything technical or music related to any of the guests, then feel free to drop your comments, and we'll try to move you into the conversation. Um, so yeah, let's get started. And I think I should start with Alex because Alex is the maker of tidal cycles. And what I was wondering, Alex, what made you decide to create tidal cycles, and what were you using before to create music, and what was it lacking? What did you need? Why did you need to write such a program?
Um, I don't know. I mean, I guess it's not really a need because there's a lot of ways to make music, and they're all good. But I guess, I guess I started around the year 2000, talking to my friend Adrian Ward, and we decided to start making music just with our own software. Like we made a little manifesto for ourselves and stuff, and decided that's what we wanted to do. We didn't want to use anyone else's; we just want to use our own. Um, Now that feels a bit of an over-the-top position, and now I use other people's software as well. But I guess that was it. We were just at a stage where we wanted to do something forthright, a bit different, and had in mind that we'd just be able to write software that just generated everything for us. But I guess it's not really a need, just like a strange idea that we decided to follow. I
Mm.
guess we're inspired by people like Alltecker, listening to a lot of that stuff. Um, uh, but yeah, live coding. So we started off just writing software to make music and just running it during a performance. But then around the year 2003, there was something in the air, like we got in contact with other people doing similar things, and it seemed like people were talking about live programming where you could actually write the software during the performance. Like my friend Julian Roriver in then Hamburg had something called PowerBooks Unplugged, where they were just like a big laptop band. Um, and yeah, so it seemed like there was just something in the air around that time, and we started talking to each other and meeting up. Had a meeting in Hamburg, organised by Julian and Renata Weiser, where yeah, we just sharing ideas about how we could possibly do this. But it seemed like just a strange idea. Still, it still took us it took me like a couple of minutes before I made any sound. It's a really impractical way to make music. Write software to make it for you, especially when you're writing it all live during a performance. But but then I was collaborating with my friend Alex Garagocci, who's a percussionist. He's sort of a free improviser, and I just he just really encouraged me to do this from scratch live performances where it was just all improvised with code, and we and that's what kind of pushed me to make Tidal. Really, the need to respond faster to collaborate with people. And with Tidal, I think you can make a change every few seconds, and it's much more of a to and fro with the collaborator. So I guess that's sort of why, just as a way to make music. But since then, it's sort of turned into a free open source project, and people are taking it in all kinds of other directions. So it'd be interesting to hear what Ben and Lizzie think about this as well.
Real quick. So last time I was on, I got asked to describe it. And I actually found that I realized on the spot that I found that a little challenging. So maybe could you do that? I'd love to hear your.
That was going to be my next question. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really difficult question because there's so many ways to come at it. It's sort of from the computer scientific direction, which would be something about functions of time or something. Or there's the more pattern direction. Maybe that's a bit more interesting. It's sort of so Tidal for me is about algorithmic pattern. In music, we often talk about pattern like sequences, like putting a pattern into a drum machine. But algorithmic pattern, I think, takes it into more other kinds of pattern that you might be familiar from wallpaper patterns or weaving patterns or something like symmetry. You think of as being pattern, and interference patterns. When you like put two bits of netting on top of each other, suddenly you see all these weird wow effects, and that's kind of interference pattern, or deviations from a pattern, I guess repetitions and things are also sort of features of patterns. And repetitions, of course, pretty important to what we do. Repetitive patterns. So I think for me, it's about using code to connect perception of pattern with language. So ways of think about pattern as something like a knitting pattern where you follow instructions, and pattern is something you see in something, like you see, oh, that's a nice pattern, and kind of see some structure. And so it's like a connection between making, pattern as the connection between making and perception, and the code sort of sits in between as the sort of interface for that. That's quite a ranty way of explaining what Tidal is. But, how would you describe it, Lizzie?
Just like noise machine, maybe, or something really, really simple. Something that makes fun sounds.
What did you make? What made you choose to use this as your instrument rather than any other more obvious choice, I guess, to make music, Lizzie?
Well, I saw one of my good friends, Joanne, was part of the live coding scene, and I saw what she was doing. She would like come along to like house parties and just like bring her laptop and plug it in and like project the code on just like a living room wall, and I was just like, what is going on? This is kind of crazy, but also really, really cool. Yeah, I think I just kind of like identified with like using language as a way to make music rather than kind of physical or dexterity stuff. I think for me, I like writing anyways, and it was quite just a freeing way to like say, I have this idea of what I want it to do musically, bash a few keys on your keyboard and you're making sounds that way. It seemed like a different way that kind of resonated with me.
Is it your first instrument, or did you make music in other ways before you moved to live coding?
Yeah, so I grew up like playing traditional instruments, and then I had a few like synthesizers that I played with before. So it wasn't like a complete newbie to the whole concept, but I don't know. I just never really got into traditional hardware in the same way that I did with software for some reason. But maybe that's just like I think one of the good things about Tidal as well is it's being free, and so you don't have to spend like so much money on like a really big modular setup to make interesting sounds.
Yeah, and
so I think that was
in that sense, it's a really accessible thing to do. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite hard to install still.
Okay.
In other ways, it's accessible. Like, I think the community is accessible, and yeah, quite easy to get information. Some gaps in documentation, but
So
yeah.
let's say someone wants to get into this. What do they need? What exactly do they need? What do they need to do? Or
I guess a laptop, and that's it really. It can be Windows, Linux, or Mac. And go to tidalcycles.org and follow the installation instructions. The installers usually work, but if not, then don't be dispirited. Just join. If you go to the community links, there's like live chat where people are around to help you out often, or the forum, Tidal Club we call it. That might be a better place to go actually, because maybe other people have already had the same problem and you'd be able to search it up. Yeah, normally it'd be nice to go along to a workshop, but it's a bit harder to do these days. So, yeah, maybe soon.
so then let's say I install it tonight, and I want to get started. What do I get presented with? Well, how does it look, and what do I need to do? Can you sort of give a little peek in the interface? What how do you interface with it?
Shall I answer that? Sort of, it's like
Or Lizzie, yeah. Or Ben, whoever, yeah, just because
yeah,
it's I'm familiar with things like MaxMSP or Reactor or Kima, but that's
Sure.
all node based, So you get basically you have a screen, and it's sort of visualized how your signal flow is going to be, and what you can expect, because everything already has names. Is there any clues like that in Tidal Cycles?
Well, you basically just get a text editor. So you're just typing text and sending it to Tidal to turn into sound. So the interface is really just words, just trying them out, seeing what they do.
It doesn't do sound by itself, so you have to give commands, send it through to a sampler or a synth or something.
Yeah, so it comes with the usual way to use it is with something called Super Dirt, made by Julian, who I mentioned earlier, and that runs in Super Collider, which is also free. But you can also link up with MIDI or anything that takes open sound control messages. But yeah, so I guess there's different parts to it. There's the mini notation, which is like a way of sequencing, which is quite a terse way of layering up different sounds. You have a name for each sound. You can load in your own sounds as well. But then you build structures like cyclic structures in the mini notation. So that's one part of it. It's polyrhythmic, so you can do quite complex sort of time signatures and things, which we can talk about later maybe. And then once you've made your sequence, which is already quite a big world, you then have these other functions which you apply to transform that in different ways. So I mentioned symmetry earlier. You might want to reverse the pattern every third cycles or something like that, or shift it backs and forwards. That's like a kind of rotational symmetry. Or you might want to take two sequences and combine them in different ways. And there's a lot of different ways to combine patterns, which is sort of where the sort of interference patterns come in. You can do things like speed up the pattern, but then the amount that it's sped up is also a pattern. So basically in Tidal, everything's a pattern. So if you want to speed something up by 2 for half the cycle and then slow it down for the second half, you can do that. Or you could pattern, you could do beat slicing and then pattern sort of rearrangement of that if you wanted to do some aiming cut-ups or something. Yeah, so it's basically working with sequences, transferring them with these functions. And that's basically it, I suppose. But it's all with text.
I feel like I could jump in there a little bit about the workflow. And for me, there's a number of different aspects to Tidal cycles. I think it'd be really interesting to touch on all of them. One is, we're talking about how we interface with making music, and this is text-based. Then there's the results that we get and whether we find them interesting or not and how we use them. Then there's the open source community, which I would love to talk about because I'm really interested and I have questions about that. And then there's the algo rave stuff as well. But to talk about like when you just get it, some things that people might not be familiar with is that you're coding in a text editor, which are usually used for programming languages. So there are a bunch of free ones. There's Atom, or there's VS Code, or there's Sublime. But people might not be used to making music in this way, but that can actually be a really interesting way to come up with different results and try new things. So basically, once you have it all installed, you have to go in the terminal to install Haskell. There's instructions. Then you load up SuperCollider, because what Tidal does, which coming from, then there are these packages for various code editors like Atom, VS Code, that communicate with, by default, communicates with SuperCollider. So basically all that Tidal is doing is sending out OSC messages. It's OSC messages containing all of the information to create that event. Then by default, that is piped into SuperCollider, and somebody, Julian, I think is his name, has built a package of instruments that take that default OSC information that Tidal sends out and turns it into sound. And SuperCollider is an incredibly powerful open source piece of software so it can do pretty amazing sample mangling, synthesis, and effects just by default. So and they, Julian, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think his name is Julian. He's gone to a lot of trouble to sort of map all of these things so that when you type them, be it an effect or a control or a sample or a synthesizer, they just by default create that thing, so you don't have to do it. You could map that to Max MSP or anything that accepts OSC, but then you would have to go to the trouble of defining all of those default things or whatever custom functionality you wanted it to do, because Tidal is simply an OSC sequencer at its core. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, it doesn't do anything apart from pattern OSC messages.
So yeah, you could get it to, so it's very open-ended. You could get it to do whatever you want, but SuperCollider already does so much that I think most people probably use it that way, because SuperCollider, you can also send out MIDI messages, CC, but you can do the whole gamut of MIDI, or you can obviously do OSC as well. So I think the learning curve of getting it installed and knowing how to just make sound is probably the hardest part of it. And then once you have that, you can kind of go from there.
Have people tried to make this work with control voltage?
Yeah.
I mean, through MIDI or OSC. Have you seen examples of people using Tidal cycles as integrated with modular?
Yeah, there's somebody on the Tidal Cycles forum. Somebody has built a GitHub package that I have installed that does that. It sends out control voltage.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess I'll just keep talking.
Go.
Unless anybody else. So for me, what I find interesting about the things that I touched upon that is I don't come from that background. My interest in it is a lot of what you were talking about, Alex, of just the patterns, because I think that for me, there are patterns that are unique to Tidal in a lot of ways. Like I haven't come across a way to make these any other way, especially not as efficiently. And so for me, it's really about the results that I get. Like I'm interested in it to make studio records primarily. So my workflow is almost like it's all basically MIDI, some sample stuff, but I just kind of end up recording the MIDI in my DAW and using sort of external samplers and drum machines and just using it as an engine to create patterns and music. And you know, the speed with which you can get something like complex that would take ages to actually sequence or conceptualize in a linear DAW is very easy and quick to do in Tidal once you understand the language, in my opinion. And you get results that are just completely different from a linear workflow because you have these things that are overlapping at different rates and interacting in an algorithmic way.
So Ben, is your strategy stumbling upon things while you are sort of thinking of ideas how to make it do certain things, and then just keep doing things until you make a choice or a judgment? Okay, this is the thing I want to go with, or is that the way you do it, or are you really conceptualizing these things in your head before you even start?
No, it's mostly play, and then you'll find something that is cool, and you'll kind of like hone in on that, and then modify it. And one thing that, like, my favorite patterns that I've made are ones that are just inherently sort of interesting, and I don't have to like touch them that much because they're continually change. If you can, with a few lines of code, you can make these things that are continually changing, and the balance is like finding that point where it makes sense, it's not chaotic, but it's continually interesting to listen to because of the way that it's changing and morphing. And so a lot of my favorite patterns, like I can just play for like 20 minutes without doing much because of the way, Tidal has all of these conditional, all these conditions that you can make. So you say every 5 cycles do this, or when the modulo like is between these two numbers do this, or percentage wise do this. So you can create these things that once you've created them sort of like have a life. And I think that's the beauty of algorithmic music, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, Lizzie, please.
No, I think kind of jumping off what you're saying, I think one of the things I find really cool about Tidal is this idea of randomness. So a lot of times you'll run a pattern and one time it will sound this way, and then you'll run it again and it won't sound the same, and you're like, why is it doing that? But it's like there's a lot of functions in there that like are generating random numbers, and then the sounds coming from that. So it's this really nice thing that, especially like for me, I use it live most often. Like I've not done too much in the way of like in the studio recording a track with it. I like that kind of element of, okay, it's going to run once and I have no idea how this is exactly going to sound, and it might be good and it might be bad, and let's kind of embrace the
that's cool. That's
chaotic nature of it sometimes.
Yeah, but that's very similar to playing live with hardware, or even people who are in a jazz group or something. You have a certain thing that you set, the tempo or the key, whatever, and then you just let it take you where it takes you. It sounds dangerous.
Yeah, but I think people enjoy it when they sense it.
Of course, it should be dangerous. Yeah. Performances should be dangerous. Absolutely.
Yeah, it should have ups and downs, and
So if I understand right, when now we're talking about live coding, right? Because Ben was talking about how he applies the sequencer in the studio, but you two do live performances. So you go there, you have an empty screen, and then you start, and basically it all exists only in that one moment, and by the time you're done, it's gone, right? That's how it.
Yeah.
That's how you do it.
I guess Alex is a bit more purist than me because he starts with the empty screen, whereas I am not quite there yet. Like I find that a bit too daunting to have nothing to start with. So I kind of come with some prepared code, but I'm just kind of changing things on the fly. Whereas I guess most of the time, that's the way you do it, Alex, right?
Yeah, I think people, it's like a spectrum. Everyone's on a different place on it. There's a lot of people who would just bring code and run it without even hardly editing it at all. Others sort of bring prepared snippets, which they then improvise from. But yeah, I kind of enjoy the. Yeah, am I still there? The network's going a bit funny.
You're
okay.
Fine. You look
okay, good. Yeah, so I really enjoy that feeling of having a blank screen and not knowing what's going to happen until I start typing. And when it's good, it's just so nice to just have music happening, just coming from your fingertips, and also to be able to be surprised by what you're doing all the time. Like when you're running, have several things happening at the same time, the overall effect you're never going to be able to predict, especially when you have all these patterns stacked up, all these different functions manipulating the pattern in different ways. So for me, that aspect of surprise is really important. And also I think learning, like my favorite thing to do would be to come up with a new function, add it to Tidal, and then use it for the first time in a performance, because then, because language is all about combination of different elements. And if you add a new element, then it freshens up all the other ones. It's really generative in that sense.
So yeah, that was something I was wondering about. How do you deal with polyphony or sort of like multiple sounds going on at the same time? Do they all have like their own section in the code that you are writing, or is there, I don't know. I mean, if I see one screen with just a bunch of code, I don't quite understand how you then make these separate things work. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I guess it's
can you mute things on and off, and make sort of like arrangement type things, or is it just always one file that is executed and plays everything at the same time?
Yeah, I guess it's more like a conversation, isn't it? So you're like sending blocks of, you might have a page full of code, but that code won't all be running. So you'll be sending blocks to Tidal to run.
Right.
And yeah, muting and unmuting things. What I like to do is have just a simple MIDI controller, like this one where I've got like 8 sliders, and each one would be like, I'll be able to mute. I might have up to 8 patterns running, but I'd be able to switch them on and off with that, and also have a DJ filter on each one, so I can sort of cut out different frequency ranges.
Okay.
Which is really nice, especially when collaborating with someone else, to give them space and things.
Okay, so there is a physical input as well, other than the keyboard.
Yeah, you can have MIDI input. Yeah.
Okay, right.
Or
yeah,
OSC.
because I was wondering how do you deal with transitions? I mean, I've listened to sets from both Lizzie and you, and then you hear things come in and out, and some parts stop, and then something else comes in. So I was just wondering, is that all just typing, or is there something else going on?
Mostly typing, yeah.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, I just type.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
but you,
yeah.
sorry.
Yeah,
I was going to say, oh, sorry. We said the same thing. So you think of polyphony like you can have multiple patterns going at the same time, but a pattern isn't the same as a sound. A pattern can be playing a bunch of different sounds. Right. But then you can have multiple patterns going, and you can start and stop each one. Or there are all these cool transition functions. So you can like, actually, if one's going, you can crossfade into another pattern, or have it like disintegrate and recompile the new pattern.
That's cool.
So there are transitions within it, but you do think of you can have polyphony within a pattern in terms of playing more than one sound at one time, but you think of each one as patterns. So it'd be like if you had sequencers in a DAW kind of.
Can you morph patterns? So one pattern is playing and there's another one waiting, and it sort of slowly takes on the shape of the other one. Is that possible too? Sort of like it rearranges itself bit by bit, like morphing into another pattern.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah.
I'll keep that idea if you don't mind.
Do it.
Yeah, there is something where it's a transition where it will randomly drop out events from one pattern and gradually introduce another, but actually morphing.
Right. Yeah.
Well, you could do it. You could do a crossfade, but that's not quite the same. Yeah.
Yeah.
What about the mask, like crossfading into like a mask function?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, we're just going to start
to-do list
coding
is going to be.
Yeah, Alex is gone. Gone. We lost him.
Back in a minute.
I have a question, and it's something that I find interesting because it seems philosophical, which is why open source?
Yeah, it's not something I think about too much because it's just something I've always been part of. It's like just in the background, everything. I just use this Linux thing. I download everything for free. It wouldn't really make sense for me to not share it. But I guess, it's not just me that makes Tidal now. It's an open source project, which means that I benefit from what other people contribute to it, including Lizzie has been adding some patches to fix up some features and do a whole other project where, that's a whole other topic. But yeah, has been working on a sort of machine learning thing with it.
But it's part of the sort of DIY ethos of the whole live coding movement, right? Open source and community and sharing things and
like I use SuperCollider, that's free, and
yeah.
But I guess it's also, I have to recognise that I'm pretty privileged to be able to do that, just work without, and that's because I've been a funded student. That's when I first started making Tidal. So I was lucky enough to have a grant to do that.
So what do you feel like your relationship is to it? I know that might be a weird question, but
yeah, it's an interesting question. I guess it's it's changed. So to start with, it was like no one else was using it. I put it online, but it's very difficult to install, even harder than it was. And it was just like my way of making music, I guess. It's just something I was exploring. But yeah, the process of sharing it, and like this guy Mike Hognick, Kindome started using it, encouraging other people to use it, and then
that's how I found it.
Yeah, it's been a weird process. It's like, I don't know if, I guess it's like making anything really. You don't necessarily want to share the creative process of it immediately. It's like you've got this weird idea in your head about something, whether it's a piece of music, and you just want to get it down on your own, depending what it is, and then gradually you go through the process of sharing it with the world. But now it's like, I guess I think of it as more of a community or something. It's like community, and it's interesting because everyone who's engaged with it is in some way a coder, whether they like it or not. So whether you're working on the code or just using it to make music, then you're kind of speaking the same language. So yeah, it just feels like as one community of practice, and just like this big blob of weird people doing strange things, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess I really like the fact that I've been able to kind of mold the tools as well. Like, obviously it's this thing that Alex has made, but then there's so many ways that you can kind of shape it to the way that you feel like you make music. So it doesn't have to be this kind of like unilateral way of making music. It's actually kind of nice that you can start learning it, and the more you get into it, the more you can kind of work out how you can shape it to your own kind of musical practice, I guess.
Yeah, I think I thought of that because I realized that my relationship to it feels quite different, and in terms of learning it. And I think that's, you know, I started, or I got shown Maximus P, you know, like 99 or something like that by a professor. And it was confusing and like totally changed my brain and opened up a lot of doors and turned on a lot of lights. But there were people at schools whose jobs it were essentially to help teach this. And so and then most of the other software, I mean, I do use some open source stuff, but a lot of what I use is commercial, where you can kind of like demand, you know, you have a certain like, you feel like you are privileged to know the answer to how to use something, or it's like, you know, I paid for it. I should know how to do this. If there's a bug, it's like, hey, this is a showstopper. Somebody over there fix this. You know, you feel kind of privileged. And I'm finding with this, it's like it's quite different. It's like, okay, I have a question or I have an issue. It's like, please, like, so, you know, I have to sort of ask people like you, or people, you know, either you specifically or people like you, for help. And I sometimes feel like almost guilty, like I'm taking all of their time, like asking my sort of silly questions, or like I don't quite know, or like I should know more, or I need to. It actually makes me a little bit more invested in the community, because I'm realizing that it is all upon people like us that know the answers, and therefore feel some sort of obligation to this community to share them. But that I'm also just acknowledging that that's somewhat of a new sensation for me, and I find it interesting and different.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear. I think some people, I think, sometimes get that a bit wrong when they come to an open source project and sort of come at it with a little bit of entitlement. And
totally.
Yeah.
I probably did at some point too. I apologize.
No, not at all. But I think actually that only really happened a bit earlier on in the community. Now I think it has its own ethos, and when people come to it, they see this forum full of people being helpful and kind to each other, hopefully, and and that carries through, and it's less like a sort of support, customer support process, and it's more like an exchange. The nicest thing I like doing is running a workshop. Well, I haven't been able to do it lately because I get so much from it, like sharing Tidal with people. They ask these questions, like this nice question about morphing from one pattern to another. How do you do that? And there's always at least one or two questions where I really kind of think, yeah, why can't you do that? That'd be awesome.
Yeah. I guess my real question is, like, do you feel like you've created this thing and unleashed it, and now it is everyone's and it's sort of up to them? Or do you actually personally still take on a lot of like the ownership or desire, or, you know, desire to shepherd people through the process? Or, you know, how do you deal with, if somebody comes with some entitlement and you're like, you know, how do you deal with that, or where does that sit with you?
These days I just ignore it, I think, and wait to give it more polite. Yeah, it doesn't really happen that much anymore. Yeah, I don't know. It's just like normal community stuff, I guess. It's just, yeah, as things grow, it changes in character. Yeah, I heard this thing about once the community goes beyond 100, it really changes character. You have to start policing it and things. So, yeah, but yeah, I haven't really felt that with Tidal. It's just organically grown really slowly.
Yeah. I mean, I will say that like my favorite place on the internet right now is the Lines community, which is
nice.
A pretty large community, but everyone is so helpful and so nice and so respectful that it really does foster this kind of community feeling. And it seems to be based around the ethos of open source and sharing and learning together and passing along knowledge, it's great.
Yeah, I think it's something we're getting better at. I think is keeping communities non-toxic. People, there's various problems that have underlined internet communication since it's sort of grown out of military and academic contexts about meritocracy and things. But as movements like Black Lives Matter and stuff like that sort of teach us more about our failings. It sort of allows us to reflect more and build these communities, and see building a community as an important part of our creative practice as well, I think.
And not lurking in the shadows, but involving yourself within it as well, sort of giving back in some way. Just answering questions anyway.
I think you've got some friends showing up here. Hello, Iris.
Hey, Iris.
She says free software is about taking the tools and learn how to build them and use them in the meantime. Is that something you agree with?
Can you put that up again?
Here we go.
Taking the tools and learn how to build them and use them in the meantime. Yeah, I guess it is about that sort of shared learning process. Iris is from Argentina. Buenos Aires, really strong live coding community there, so nice to see her. It's nice to see how it's spread across the world and how it's sort of taking on these different qualities in different places. Very strong in Argentina.
Yeah, I think the point about like learning how to use it and then making, and I think it's like a perpetual cycle of, I think I still feel like I'm learning a lot of the time. Like I've been using it for a while now, but there's still so many things that I haven't thought of and that no one else thinks of as well. I think that's it. It's like there's almost infinite possibilities with something like Tidal.
So do people in the community also share sort of their trades and secrets, or is it more like helping each other with technical stuff?
I think when you project your screen, you can't really hide too much, and there's not much sort of gatekeeping or anything. It's all about the sharing, I guess.
Because it sounds like you can kind of develop your own vocabulary if you want. If you're a live coding artist, you build your own bag of tricks and routines, I guess. Approaches, ways of doing things.
There's a lot of styles. There's a lot of opportunity because the style is almost there in front of you, expressed as code. So it's kind of I think the relationship between your own personal style and your code is an interesting one. And just by sharing it, you're kind of sharing.
So do people cheer about the code if there's something really smart is coming up, like with turntablism, when somebody does a really complicated trick, like does that happen, or people just more appreciate it silently?
I always like make a little mental note and be like, "Oh, try that."
Oh yeah, I'm gonna steal that from you.
Yeah, probably shouldn't admit that.
Yeah, I think the cheer only happens when there's a crash.
I was actually going to ask about that in terms of algorithms, because one thing about electronic music performance that people have been trying to figure out a way to tackle forever is how to make it express that it's live, like how to make somebody there know that you are doing something live. And so this is one way to do that, but it is so hyper specific. I've often wondered if the people that are there that just want to listen to music and don't know anything about code, like what they feel about that, or how they interact with it, or if it doesn't matter at all, or it just occurred to me that like the people that are in the crowd knowing like stealing functions, I'm guessing is like a much small percentage of the audience.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, I reckon. I mean, I guess when someone's DJing, there might be some people shoulder surfing, watching how they're doing, and there'll be a small group of people.
Train spotters.
Yeah.
But Ben, I think to be honest, if something is really live and improvised, no matter what tools or what interface you use, people are always going to feel that or notice that, because it's
I agree.
like I said before, there is a certain danger, there's a certain tension in the air when somebody actually improvises in front of you, and that sort of that journey and that unexpectedness that can happen is something that everybody in the room can feel. I'm sure that is the same. That is true for live coding as well.
Yeah.
I agree, but it's just a very visual connection, because I think that's a lot about electronic music, is how do you make the visual connection between what you're hearing and knowing that something is live, like the live creation, the one-to-one correspondence between like movement and sound. And so this is just one. I mean, this is one way that I think it accomplishes that, but it does it in a very specific sort of way.
It's a massive trade-off, isn't it? I think the problem with projecting the screen, I mean, the plus side is you can see what people are doing, but I think if you're reading code, that can kind of distract you from listening. It's quite hard. It's like trying to read a book while listening to music. You can't really do both at the same time. So I worry that there's like contention there. And actually I used to obscure my code in different ways. Like if I was collaborating with someone, sort of superimpose both screens, like have both projectors pointing at the same bit, so it'd be harder to read, and strobe at the screen. Until this guy Annie was in the audience, who's profoundly deaf, and he told me, I was really into this. He was a programmer, so he actually found that he could understand the music more. Like had some hearing, so he did listen to music, but he found that by being able to read the code, he could actually hear more of the structure.
Oh wow!
And I thought,
That's cool.
Yeah, okay. It's also different people they experience it in different ways. So it's best just to project it and not sort of stop people from reading it if they want to. And he actually ended up taking up Tidal himself and performing in a big festival and stuff. So, and making an album with it and stuff. So that was really
cool.
nice. Yeah, nice technique. So yeah, I think but for me, live coding has always been a double-edged sword, and actually the whole thing I think is because if you're working with music as language, you're kind of close to the composition. You're like working on that level, which means in a way you're further away from the sound. And that is a trade-off. Like it's not a panacea.
So, are you saying? Because that's something I was thinking about. I've got some experience with code that does music or sound, and I've got a bunch of modular Eurorack stuff. Being able to keep an entire system in your head, or in your case the code, can sometimes be distracting from just purely kind of feeling what is happening in musically. Don't you get distracted while coding by what you hear? Like, do you get distracted, or does your mind sort of float off in into the sound domain rather than the coding domain sometimes, because that's what happens to me. I don't have the brain that can do both at the same time. You know what I mean? So, how does it work for you?
I think for me, if I have like an error or a bug, then I have to get like sharply pulled into the coding domain, because then you're kind of really focused on how can I fix this,
Right.
which is kind of a very computer science way to look at sound, I guess. I don't know about the others.
Yeah, for me, I find live coding is much more about listening than coding in a way. So I don't understand the code in front of me. I know how to change it. I know how to make it more complex or add an extra function to something, but it's not like I understand what the whole thing's doing. So I feel like I don't have that kind of cognitive load going on. It feels like I'm very much locked in a state of flow if it's going well. And what I'm really focused on is what the sound is, because that is the surprise that's coming back at you. Is sort of, and also when the next change should be, especially if I'm making techno. It's really important to play with people's expectations, which means being totally aware where you are in that 16 bar or 8 bar pattern, that cycle. Because it feels like I'm continually working against deadlines. Like I need to make a change every 4 repetitions of this, otherwise it's going to get stale. So it feels like almost what time when I do something is more important than what I do. But I think, but it's weird because you are in this weird sort of language space, and making dance music feels like you should be able to be a bit more aware of the room than I am sometimes. But still, I feel like I do sense when things are going well and when people are kind of going for it. I feel like I feel that build up, but it wouldn't be. I think it would probably be different if I was playing an actual instrument and a bit more able to look around the room, because they're really locked on that window. Don't look away.
So in a sense, it's still, although it's coding and it's very sort of based on numbers and concepts and stuff. You could say that there's still it's still a very intuitive way of playing for you then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think people might think code is a bit scary, but actually,
yeah, I do.
It's super simple. Like I've done workshops with sort of groups of 8-year-olds and managed to teach them enough Tidal to make a little performance together inside an hour and record it inside that hour. So you don't need to know much of it. And actually,
well, I know from the modular synth world and using Max MSP and Reactor that a few very, very simple rules can create enormous complexity.
Yeah, that's what it's about. Yeah, it's about coming to performance, maybe thinking, okay, I might try out these 2 or 3 functions, maybe focus on that, and have those in mind rather than try and overcomplicate things. I think the best algorithmic music is really focused on the simplicities. I was listening to Beatrice Dillon's album earlier today after finding out that she used Tidal a bit on it, and it's really, really engaging and clean and clear. And Mark Fell's work as well uses Max. Like instability, really kind of crystal clear, very simple interactions that just completely captivated.
Yeah, Mark Fell's stuff is you could classify it as simple, but it's very, very intense and
yeah.
I love his
and
stuff.
He'll be happy to describe it as straightforward. I was reading something where he just explaining that he sent a patch to someone for an installation, and they thought there's something wrong because it's just like a few boxes. That was what we meant to send. Just these really nice. I think it's the same idea of pattern really as in Tidal, but he approaches it a different way. Very amazing stuff.
I saw something coming in from our friend Synchrotron. He's also on the Discord server. He's asking, there's talk about patterns. What about sound design? Is that a separate task? I think you talked about it briefly in the beginning, but it's also still not 100% clear to me where the Tidal cycles program is basically the sequencer, and then you can tell it to do to tell it have it tell instruments what to do. Basically, that's the simple explanation, right?
Yeah. So no. Go ahead, Alex.
Okay, I'll just say something very quickly that with Tidal you pattern the sound, but also different aspects of the sound, like the effects. There's a huge library.
So it could be both sound design and changing the order, but also the sort of like maybe the decay or filter or accents and stuff like that.
The timbre,
so it's both at the same time, in fact,
You can pattern when an event happens, and then also all kinds of control patterns for that sound or for that sample. So, you could tell it where in the sample to play, how long. Then you could apply effects like filters, reverbs, distortions. It's super collider, so there's all kinds of really interesting effects, like interesting distortions, even FFT kind of stuff. So then you can pattern the control. You can have these kind of step sequencers or LFOs for these parameters for the effects or for the filters or whatever.
I should say that it doesn't have to be about sound, because all it is about patterning out network messages. I've used it to control lights. Didn't you run a workshop, Lizzie, linking Tidal with Hydra for visuals?
Yeah, although that was not actually taking the audio input and doing an FFT, so it wasn't actually. But there is a way to do that where you can send network messages into like a visuals program. So yeah. I don't know. I guess on like the sound design question as well. Like I've seen people do some interesting things with Tidal. That's not just. It's like taking a lot longer samples and kind of splicing it up, and I think that's another way to approach the thing. Is what sound are you actually working with? Are you working with like a really short sample, or are you working with MIDI, or are you working with like a sample pack, or like a vocal? Like I've seen some really interesting like vocal processing as well. So I think that's one way of kind of thinking about doing sound design.
If you draw the line between the two of those, between just the order of things and the way they sound when they come out, I guess it's both sound design and sequencing.
Well, unless you want to use it for MIDI, and then you're just doing the sound design somewhere else. But you can still send the same kind of control patterns through MIDI to your actual synthesizer. Yeah, I mean, but it also has all kinds of sample manipulation things. Like you can, as Lizzie said, you can chop up samples. You can do sort of like pseudo granular kind of effects. You can rearrange the slices of samples. So there's quite a bit. There's a ton you can do in terms of sound design.
Here's an interesting one. From Black Market Droidsmith. Sup, Black Market.
I'm gonna go with Droidsmith.
Yeah.
Mister.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Yeah, something that's interesting. How does Tidal handle swing or wonky clocks? Does it do that as well?
That's one of the reasons I was most interested in it, I think.
Okay.
In terms of the wonky clocks. Swing, there's this thing called nudge where you can pattern the nudge of each event. But I find more interesting are some of the other modes. So Alex, we didn't really, or Lizzie too, we didn't really talk about this of what a cycle is. And even that concept is different from like a bar, a metric bar. So do you want to jump off, or should I talk about my limited understanding of what a cycle is and why you thought of that and why you created it and how it works?
Well, it comes from this system called the Bold processor. I don't know if you've heard from that. Bold processor version 2 in particular. It's by this guy, Bernard Bell, who's a French-Indian computer scientist, I guess. But he was notating tabla rhythms. India, I can't remember whereabouts in India, but so bowls being the syllables that represent different drum sounds. So he's using those to notate, because Indian classical music is really an oral culture. So the idea of notation is, at least when he was doing this quite a while ago, was quite a controversial one. But he ended up building up into a computer music system with that really amazing approach to time setting. Tidal doesn't get as far as he did with this, having sounds which just arrange themselves according to rules and things. But it has this sort of way of doing polyrhythmic notation, which is actually what the mini notation in Tidal is based on. So even though I don't have any music training, sort of reading about this Bold processor system sort of gives it a grounding in Indian classical music, probably more than Western classical music. And I think that's where the idea of the metrical cycle comes from. This way of things not being based on beats. Like there's no concept of beats per bar in Tidal. You just tell it how many events to put in a cycle, and it'll just squash them in. And then you can break down that down further. So you can have the first half of the cycle have 2 events, and the second half have 3 events. You've got it's kind of 2 against 3 structure immediately, and each one of those is its own cycle. So if you slow that down, then you'll end up getting only half the events through each cycle, and you can very quickly build up quite complex structures just by this notation. So it comes from this idea of, I think it's the Tal from Indian classical music, sort of sometimes it can be very long cycles, and so you see people even in the audience sort of moving their hands to keep tabs on where they are in this metrical cycle, but then everything comes together in the end. So but I guess it all comes from in terms of the software side, it's sort of thinking about music as behavior rather than sequences. So we've been saying that Tidal's about sequences, but actually there aren't really any sequences. Like the way it represents music isn't as a sequence at all. It's just kind of stacking up all these functions, each applying a different bit of behavior to the pattern. So you end up with something that's very fluid in terms of the metrical structure. It also uses rational numbers, so things can be really subdivided perfectly. Like if you computers are rubbish at representing the number a third for some reason. Normally, just can't do it, but because it's using rational numbers, it manages to do this. But I guess that's There's lots of different ways of coming at this idea of the cycle, but I guess that's it really. It comes from Indian classical music, and it's about behavior, not sequence.
Right, but so going back to that question, which is like getting wonky or sort of off
Sure.
different sounding rhythms, even the sort of like conceit of a cycle instantly gives you rhythms that are much harder to get other places. So like say you have one event per cycle, you could think of that as a whole note. If you have two, you could think of that as two half notes. If you have three, actually, I should back up. If you have one event, that's a whole note. If you add a second, you don't have two whole notes.
Yeah.
You've taken that whole note, you've divided it into, so you have two half notes. Then if you add a third event, you don't have three half notes.
No.
You now have a polyrhythm. If you have something going at a steady metric, like if you have something still going at 2 and you add 3 events to that one, now you have 3/2. So that is a very different way of sequencing. So the more events you add to your pattern, the faster each event is, which is unlike a DAW or something where you're like, oh, I want to add a 16th note. Now your pattern is longer. Your pattern doesn't get longer. Everything always fits in that cycle. I'm generalizing here, but it squishes down. So that's already sort of a way to generate things that are harder to do in other environments. And then there are these other sequencing modes. There are polyrhythmic modes and polymetric modes. And you can do some really funky things in there with sort of where events fall in the measure, or sort of in the cycle. So that's really why I'm most drawn to it, is that the patterns that you can create, that I tend to create in there, would be very hard, and I'm not sure. I just wouldn't come up with them with playing. You know, it's not like I'd be in my DAW and like, oh, let me shift this one some sort of, 1/7 this way. You know, you just sort of like don't think that way. And real quick, going back to talking about sharing. So I found out about Tidal cycles through a podcast, and they talked about Kindome. And so I just searched for Kindome on YouTube. And Mike has hours of screencasts and tutorials of him talking about how to make music in Tidal. And it's like, it's so helpful, because he walks you. I mean, honestly, I don't think I've ever come across somebody that I've seen share so much about what they do just out into the world, into the online community, for others just to learn. I find that really inspiring, and I really like his technique, and I really like the results that he's getting. So for me, it was just like, wow, like it's just a whole world where he allows you into it in a very like in the easiest way that I've found. So I'll put a link to his stuff, because I think it's super. If you're wanting to learn about it, I think it's a great resource. He's a great resource.
Yeah.
Cool, thanks. I want to go back to this cycle thing again, because I understand it, but how it at some point it doesn't really relate to tempo then anymore. I mean, the tempo would only be to make the whole thing faster and slower, but it could be so complex that there is no real relation between sort of like the metronome or a beats per minute value or something like that. So you basically you basically judge it by the way it sounds in how fast it feels, rather than how fast it actually is, right? Or
well, it does kind of work, because you just don't express it as a beats per minute. You express it as cycles per second, actually.
Right.
And then if you're making dance music, you probably are going to be based around a number 4 in terms of the number of events you put in there. You might add some polyrhythm, but and because you're picking 4 things within that cycle and it's running at
Okay, so when you would choose 4, when you would choose a cycle of 4, they would actually run in sync with a 4x4 metronome.
Yeah,
Right.
it all stays in sync because the cycle is the constant. Like
yeah, okay.
Okay. Saying,
and there's like a very simple bit of math you can do to just write BPM equals 120, and then your overall cycle is at 120. So then it's just about how many events do you want to fill that cycle. And I've actually find it really interesting to have things playing off of that in a metric, in a more sort of 4/4 way, because then you really start to hear how those events are offset.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And coming back to the wonky thing, you can also pattern the tempo, so you can have it.
Yeah. Like bouncing balls style.
Yeah. Sorry, interrupt you, Lizzie.
No, I was just gonna, I guess, off that point as well. Like for me, I kind of think tempo doesn't really exist sometimes. That like you could have a cycle at 120 of 4 beats, or you could have it half that with more beats in it, and it would still sound the same. So it kind of it makes you think like what actually is tempo and what actually is a beat per minute, anyways.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah.
I also find it interesting that when I'm in Tidal, I'll just be working on something like, oh, this is cool. Maybe I want to start using this, and I'll figure out what tempo I'm at, and I'll be at like 130, 150 BPM, which I would just never naturally do if I was starting in a DAW. I mean, the reason that I was drawn to it, I think I said this on the last stream, is that I come from the like hip hop world. My first love of music was hip hop.
BPMs can have a cultural meaning.
Yeah,
like
100%.
130 is like dance culture, 100 is hip hop culture, 200
not
is
only
scammer.
beats per minute, totally. Not only beats per minute, but beats per minute plus pattern.
Yeah,
and
sure, of course.
So if I'm in a DAW and I'm just like, all right, it's time to make a beat, I have a set sort of tempo and a set pattern that I would default to based on the music that I first loved growing up with. And now the last couple albums I wrote didn't incorporate that because I've been trying. I've really felt the sort of negative connotations in terms of my own work with attaching what I'm doing artistically to the history of so much genre. Like I'm trying to find a way, or I think I have been like working through this process of like trying to get further away from an idea of genre and being so firmly into one area of the way people understand music. So what I like about Tidal is that I've realized that it's a way to reintroduce working with drums and the sounds that I love from making rhythmic music, but in a way that abstracts it from those patterns and those tempos that I had been so used to and I'm trying to get away from. So I find it an interesting playground for rhythmic things that are detached from sort of like the past or like my past at least.
Yeah, I was just thinking that let's go for this question.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you, but this is also relating to tempo. Can you comment on that, Lizzie or Alex?
I don't know what tempo rubato is.
It's like slowing down.
Okay.
Rubato is like at the end of a piece, you would very slowly sort of let the piece die out, ramp down its tempo.
I always do that at the end of all my live sets, where I just like take the tempo and then it will be at like 150, and then I start taking it all the way down to 10, and then you get these weird kind of structures coming out from underneath. When you take the tempo back, you can kind of find actually there's like microstructures that were happening at a larger scale that you get when, I don't know, that I guess that kind of takes away from rubato, but I find that really interesting to do live.
Okay.
Yeah, so like humanization, you could program using, you know, nudge. So nudge will move an event backwards only, or forwards as well. I think it's just backwards.
It can do it. You can move it into the future or into the past a little bit at your latency setting.
Oh, okay, cool. So you could program a feel that way, like a humanization, or you could program cycles per second. But there's nothing inherent. There's no like humanization function. You would just kind of imagine what you think that is, and there'd be a way to do it.
Yeah, you could just add like a sine wave to nudge things forwards and backwards, or a little bit of randomness. Yeah, I was remembering that Tidal, I've rewritten it quite a few times, and the earlier version was basically a 16-step sequencer. Like time was really kind of discrete in that way. And it wasn't until I started collaborating with another free percussionist, Paul Hessian, and he would just continually change tempo constantly, and just the freeness of what he was doing made me want to kind of be able to break down those subdivisions. So yeah, just interesting to think about how collaboration has sort of led to changes in the technology. But yeah, in general, I think of Tidal as being quite an open system. People just take it in their own direction. But just think about tempo in particular. It used to be that the default tempo was 1 cycle per second, which is sort of the equivalent of 120. And I noticed that a lot of people didn't change that default. And that's not my favorite BPM. So I changed it to 135. So I think more people are up in that sort of techno range than Idle. But yeah, I don't normally think of myself as this kind of crazed, power mad person changing what people do. But I thought it was quite a funny thing to do. You can set your own default as well if you want.
Jakob, I'd love to hear. Have you like what is your sort of making music systems been over the years, and has that evolved, and have you experimented with a lot of things?
Sorry, was that for me?
Yeah, that was for you. Sorry.
I was zoning off in the comments. Sorry about that. Well, I've started with tape and records, an old Revox, and then I went, I got it. I bought a few drum machines and then synths and stuff. But I think what ties it all together is that I've always been into performing stuff more than endlessly clicking around or doing meticulous little jobs, because I'm too easily bored for that, you know. So I'm even the stuff that I've done, which has a very clear, strong song structure or sounds very structured, is usually cut together from live takes. Yeah, that's my approach always has been, you know, I like to experience the high of the moment, you know, and for me it's very important to have that goosebump feeling while creating something. And yeah, I do spend time post-processing things, but when the actual ideas coming together, that's usually in an act of doing something live. So for dance tracks, that's easy because you can just record an hour of, you know, movement on the mixing desk, or turning knobs or tweaking things, trying to get some tension into it, or an arc, or whatever. but for more complex structures, I usually those tracks come together at the same way, in the same way, but then are just slight, pieces just cut together of different moments in that jam or in that recording. And that's what I feel most familiar with, and that I can express myself best in that way. Just get it out, perform it, and don't look back.
And is your sequencing generally hardware or software? Have you experimented with lots of different software sequencers? Or?
Yeah, I've basically used all of them. I used trackers. I've used Cubase on the Atari. I've used Logic, Ableton, and hardware sequencers. I've got the Circlon and some modular synth sequencers, and also analog sequencers, which are part of old school analog synths. They're very, very simple, more like arpeggiator style or 16-step style or whatever. But if you combine a few of those, you can get pretty interesting stuff as well. And yeah, so I've used pretty much everything. Also Max MSP and Reactor and Kima, and so yeah, a bit of everything. But key thing is always, even if I am in software, that there's some type of physical control that I can perform the instrument or the patch or whatever. That's the thing that is always important for me.
Super interesting thinking, because I'm really rubbish at recording things. I think it's also to do with that sort of. It's not that I don't want to. I really would love to be able to record things, but I just do get bored with my own music very quickly. I love
with
making
your own
it.
music.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, not like if I come back to something 2 weeks later, it feels okay. But it's just being able to focus on a track for long enough to actually get it to a point where you're happy to record
that's
it.
That's exactly the same with me. That's why I record everything live. So I basically I commit it and make a decision about it. This is it. I'm temporarily satisfied. Maybe I tweak it in post here and there just to touch it up and make it sort of sit well with other stuff. But once that's done, I never look back. That's it. Done. And I don't go back after 2 weeks and think, maybe I should do this or that. That's just a waste of time. I'd rather start something new and get on with it,
And do you start a lot of your ideas in a software sequencer or hardware or both? Or?
These days, since I've been in this room, definitely hardware, yes. I've got the space for it now, so it's nice to have. I basically built a setup for every project I do. So get some bits of gear together, connect them in a certain way. That's usually something I work out in advance. What if I do this? What if I combine this with that machine? When I make chains of stuff, running things through other things, and then just improvise with the setup. And sometimes the setup stays there for a few days, sometimes for a week, and it can change, it can grow, it can. But still, the system is very clear because it's a very newly designed system or instrument. It's a fresh combination, but at the same time, it's very versatile because I've set it up to be versatile. So there's a massive range in all these little systems I use. So you can go from very abstract droney to mad, breakcore, whatever, and everything in between. But that gives me the most immediate control and also the most quick results. And if I get bored with the setup, I just take everything down and build a new one.
Do you find
everything?
Do you find the way that your setup is set up influences the style of music that you make, or do you think you set it up with the style in mind? I guess.
No, not with the style in mind, but with more like an aesthetic in mind, or some technical thing I try to accomplish, or some combination I want to try out. So it's just a really simple and not very musical starting point. Often it's just a way to get started. Really, you know, it's a way to get going. And yeah, some things that happen are in the range of what I thought it would become or could become, but other things happen totally unexpected, and I usually go with wherever it takes me. So you know, I like the unexpected moments when I even deliberately built in steps in the setup, or parts in the setup that can deliberately create unexpectedness. Yeah, just whack some faders and see what it does. Like you said before, like if you put something that is running at 150 all the way down to 10, you get all these artifacts and things, microstructures you call them. You get all these things happening that you never heard when they were running at a faster speed, but they start to happen because the system introduces them, and then you can choose to go with them or just leave them, or even enhance them, or emphasize on them. You know, so that's the way I work. Really, it's just it's like gardening. You know. Yeah.
And so then you just record a large amount, pick out the spots, and then
I've been
like a day later.
I've become no immediately. So after the recording, I remember the moments where I thought something interesting was happening, and then I just zoom in there, and the least I do is put a marker there, or even bounce the part out, so I can refer to it as a piece to listen to, rather than going back into the arrangement and sort of relive the whole thing again. It makes if you record long takes, it makes it very tedious and time consuming to find stuff. You know, so I pick them out immediately, so I can, and then save the whole thing as with a name that represents the sound file, so I can always go back to them. So when I find a sound file that I've in the collection, and it has a certain name, I only have to look for the arrangement or the file that has the sequences or the audio, and I open it, and it's there exactly the way the audio file is bound. So for me, it's the way of organizing, keep organized, and finding things and being able to access them quickly. But I've become quite good in picking out the stuff that is interesting and the stuff that is not interesting. And you can be tricked by this. If something sounds amazing or has some aspects that you think are really cool, but it doesn't have everything, some people just try to fix that and try to put a lot of work in that afterwards to make it sort of into something that is acceptable to them. I don't do that. I just dismiss it instantly, and I just go with the stuff that is actually something that has a story in it, or that has something interesting or intriguing, without having to fix too many things about it. You know, so it's really just capturing a moment. That's basically what I do.
And it's like fishing. I'm gonna go with fishing.
Gardening, fishing, yeah, sure. Cooking, maybe. Cooking.
Yeah, it's nice to think about these things as gardening, I think, because it's about growing something that's sort of outside of you, but you're really involved with. I'm less keen on calling it production, because that sort of feels like you're imposing rules on something, or I don't know. It feels like production and gardening are sort of opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of making things.
For sure.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Down tasks. Yeah.
I know what you mean by fishing. It's probably you mean that I stumble upon things and pick them out, or.
Yeah, I was thinking about David Lynch. He often talks about how he he fishes into the unknown and tries to catch something.
Yeah, I guess yeah, you hear that those words of wisdom from old songwriters. You know, the song writes itself, or it just comes into my consciousness from wherever. I don't know. I think working with electronic music equipment is somewhat different than finding songs in the ether or whatever. But because you have an interaction with the machines, you know, you have a control over what they do, and once you feel you have a grip on what you're doing, you can steer it, and you can take things further, and even if that kind of seems to be slipping, you can rehearse it and do it again. You know, so it's yeah, it's I think it's more like um, uh, the instruments are giving something back to you. There's an interaction, there's a dialogue sort of taking place, I think.
Yeah, I like the idea of fishing, I guess, because sometimes I feel like it kind of like slips out of my hands when I've got the fish and it just like shoots off, and you know, I'm trying to write this algorithm and then the computer takes over, and I don't know if anyone else gets that, but
for sure. Lizzie, do you record a lot as well?
I've started doing more. So I'm doing like a release this year with a Belgian label called In Unison. So I'm actually kind of moving towards trying to turn live ideas into like tracks, I guess, which is a lot harder than I thought it would be, because I'm so used to kind of just having this on the fly, kind of see where it goes. Whereas I guess when you're recording something, you want it to sound exactly how you want it to sound throughout a whole track. So yeah, I find that kind of difference between writing stuff for it to just be live and see what happens, and writing stuff to actually have it kind of concretely there as a track.
So,
I guess.
So with your music, not when you're playing live or coding live, but when you record your stuff, do you think about everything on a different pace than when you are live coding, or is it coming together in an equally quick way, or is it do you take more time to consider things, or?
I guess I'm trying to figure that out still. Like I'm trying to, because I think it's a balance of trying to figure things out exactly how you want them to be, and just letting them, like as you say, when you do it, you just let it go and see what happens, and then take out the bits from that which you think constructs this kind of like narrative or this story. So yeah, I think it's kind of a trade-off. The way that I've been doing it at the moment, and I don't know if it's the best way, is to write it as if I was live coding and then record it as like MIDI, or record it as audio separately into like a DAW, and then you can kind of go back and tweak. But I don't know, I guess maybe that is moving away from live coding too much. I don't know.
When you're a purist, maybe, but to get something interesting, it doesn't really matter, does it?
It's a tool. It's a tool.
Yeah.
I mean, but I do know what you mean about things feeling different when you're performing them versus listening back, because I often find that the time scales feel quite different. And when you're performing, especially in front of a crowd, I feel like the time scale seems slower. You can like vamp on things or let things sit or simmer. But then listening back to a piece, you know, it often feels like the changes need to be faster to me.
Yeah, I think that's it. It's a different relationship with time, isn't it? It's sort of, if you're sharing that timeline with other people, that is a very different experience from just being on your own in the studio, especially when you're looking at a piece of code, I think, because that's kind of almost timeless. It's just this.
It's locked.
Yeah. And you can get stuck in these loops and until you just, tweaking things instead of just actually making music in time. It's like you're outside of time looking in, whereas in a performance you're in there with people. And I've been trying to make an album for years now. I did a crowdfunder, which was really successful.
Oh, well, so you've already been paid for it. Great
yeah.
idea.
But
That
I
was just
still
a small detail.
I haven't actually managed to make the music. And it's the pressure of having the crowdfunder didn't necessarily help with that. But it's something I really want to crack. So it's really good to hear your techniques and I think this is something that I certainly need to learn a lot about. I did manage to make an EP once.
Just do one in one day. Do an album in one day, man.
Yeah, you said 1 hour. Give yourself 1 hour.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
a real time album. Or,
yeah. I think that's what it needs. Just get someone to lock me in a room and not let me out until. Maybe we need to form a pact, Lizzie, and sort of work out how to do these.
I'll give you the key to your room.
Yeah.
Jakob, I find your workflow really interesting because it's historically quite different from mine. I tend to, find something that interests me, be it a sound or a drum pattern, or a conceptual idea, or an instrumentation. I want to use this instrument or whatever, some technique, anything, just something to sort of like jump me off. And then I start focusing really intently on that thing and I build it, and I don't stop until I've done that one thing. And I like sort of that is my singular goal. And so I'll come back to this one sequence, or however I'm working on it, I'll come back to it day and day and day, sometimes for months, until I find that thing is done. I just keep going. I don't know. I just keep, I find that being stuck, sometimes I'll have to put it down and then I'll start on another one for a while, and I'll have a couple of these going. And sometimes putting something down and walking away for a couple of days is absolutely the right thing to do. Like right now I'm working on this piano record, which is totally new for me. I'm not a pianist. I've never written a piano record, but I'm doing it because the piano can be sequenced via MIDI. So I'm doing it with sequencers, and I'm building these sequencers and all this stuff. And I've been working on this for at least a year and a half. And when I go back and part of that is building the tools, because I've been building a sequencer at Max MSP, and so a large part of it was building the sequencer and making sure it had all the functions that it needed to create whatever the music that I wanted to hear. And when I go back and I listen to the recordings, the scratch recordings from a year and a half ago, or a year ago, or even 6 months ago, they weren't ready. They were not. I didn't have the tool set to make it yet, including the recording process, the sequencing, the composition, the recording process. Like, it has taken me this long to sort of like mature all of these different areas to a place where it's even ready for me, the way I feel, where it's even ready for me to record the album. But that's just a very different way of working. It's like, it feels like this consistent sort of hard work ethic that's cool. Made me keep going.
Yeah, it's cool. But what you in fact are doing is inventing a whole process. And when I was talking about my thing, I'm not inventing that process. It's the same process for 30 years. It's just the instruments and the signal flow changes, but the process is the same. So if you build a sequencer and you work with a piano with solenoids and you have this whole complete new system, and there's many factors in the whole thing that are unknown to you. You have to learn about. So you're inventing a lot of things during the whole process, and that is time consuming. I can imagine.
Yeah, and I think my point in bringing it up is that different methods are appropriate at different times. You know, my last 2 records, I have been in sort of creating these sequencers and these brand new ways for me to approach like a workflow for this music. But I also have done projects more like what you're talking about that have just, you know, I have all the tools and it's really just about using them and writing. And actually I've done the same as you. I've committed things straight to tape that I can't, like I'll even attempt to make them better and I can't. Like the way it was just about that initial flow of ideas, and there's something in that is better than me overworking it. So I don't know. It's an interesting difference.
But I totally understand what you're saying and relate to the process, because I've also been in trying completely new methods or things that I wasn't familiar with, and had to go to a lot of learning to be able to do anything with it, you know. So it's
Totally.
not unfamiliar to me, but at the moment I just feel happier when I'm productive, and
Totally.
and I really like to do a lot. So once in a while, this really sort of unexpected, really authentic, very pure thing comes along, and those are the things I fall in love with, and those are the things that I feel that are part of the results of this way of working. And you know, so most of it is average or not even worth mentioning, but there are some things that come along that are when everything clicks together and when something beautiful
Totally
emerges, and that's what I like.
Totally.
Trying too hard becomes sometimes, I've been there too, you know, doing just sort of overthinking things and be very obsessed with processes, and then spending a lot of hard work on something to find that is it's sort of you're proud of it, but you're proud of it because you worked on it so hard. I'd rather, you know, I'd rather be proud of something right now in this point in my life that I accomplished a sort of like a free-flowing writing process that it's sort of gives me jewels once in a while, and or at least jewels to me. I like the authenticity of something that is very simple and very pure and very elegant, rather than something that sounds amazingly complex and overworked. You know what I mean? That's something that I'm not into at the moment. I like the freedom of just creating.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'd hesitate to put like a value judgment in terms of like meaning hard work or like really focusing on one thing doesn't necessarily, in my opinion, mean it's being overworked.
I was talking about myself. The times when I was obsessing with something, it sounded overworked to me. You know what I mean?
Totally.
My own stuff. Yeah.
But I relate, and I think that they're like different workflows for different results at different times. I mean, you know, one other aspect I'm realizing about probably any field, but electronic music or music in general, is that so much of it is also about learning. And I get really excited about learning. And, you know, here we are with Tidal cycles, you know, it's been this huge learning process for me. And I get excited to learn new things because it means that eventually I will be able to have that fluency and that flow with them, where things can flow out of me quickly. And then it's like you've grown this new superpower. You can do things that you couldn't do before, and they're now part of your system. They're part of your vocabulary. So yeah, they both excite me. I think the learning and then the like realization that eventually you will be able to flow with them.
Yes, it's a strange thing, isn't it? Kind of putting a lot of work into getting to a point where you don't have to work anymore.
Yeah.
That's a real experience with coding. Like sometimes I'll think, oh, I really need this feature, and knowing that it's going to take me a month where I won't be able to do anything else apart from work on that thing. But then eventually you get something where I don't have to think about it anymore, and it's just a way to make live music. But somehow I haven't managed to get to that point of developing something where I'm developing an album. It seems I need to. It seems like a different activity. It's either working on the fundamental underlying system and then popping up to make some music, but actually make it so I'm developing something fixed that can be listened to more than once. Yeah, difficult. But yeah, you're right. I should just do it. Yeah.
So you got any interesting email, Ben?
My the food delivery for my son did not appear to be there, so it's one. I'm guessing it's one house away. Yeah, these are quarantine issues.
Yeah. Chuckling. Yeah.
Right. Maybe we should ask if there's anybody in the comments that, because I'm so sorry we've been ignoring you. If there are any specific questions for us, you can post them now, because we're sort of nearing the 2 hours. So let me see if there's something coming in. Hello, people. Maybe in the meantime, there was one thing that I found very interesting, because we're now really talking about writing music for the last hour or so. But I think the whole what surprised, well, not surprised me, what amazed me was the strong culture and the ethos around the whole live coding movement. Maybe Lizzie or Alex can talk about that for a bit, because I think that's a pretty special feature of the whole live coding thing.
Yeah. Yeah, something I wanted to talk about actually is sort of the development of a community as part of the making of music. Like when you're developing music, when you're making music for a scene that doesn't exist yet, somehow by making that music, you're making space for things to happen in. Wonder if you had any reflection on that as well. But for him, but I guess we've been talking about the actual nuts and bolts of making music a lot, but actually making a successful event, that's just one part. And there's so much that goes into making something really special happen. Just making the space happen available in the first place is a huge job, but sort of building up a whole ethos around an event and kind of building values into it and making it accessible for different kinds of people, making sure, especially with something like computer music or electronic music, making it so there's no snobbishness around it, or do you know what I mean? It's actually hitting the notes and making the sound is just part of that, and yeah, it feels like making an event is really sort of imagining a different reality almost. So yeah, that's been how much of music making is about the actual sound, and how much is it is about being part of the community and sort of
yeah, I was also sensing a slight bit of social commentary because, if coming from the vibe of that scene, because it's like, people are, we're all living our lives very much on computers or digital devices, and all we hear is how evil algorithms are running our lives. And then there's this scene who are basically taking them and doing them something for them rather than being run by them. So I thought that was an interesting angle to look at it.
Yeah, just opening up, like the fact we project our screens during the performance, people can see the algorithms and sort of see that they are fundamentally human. I don't think that necessarily makes it easier to necessarily makes algorithms less scary. It just sees an alternative approach to them, because I'm generally fearful of what Facebook are getting up to and stuff. But yeah.
I think that like freeness and open source really ties in with that as well. Of like, rather than them algorithms being things held by like mass corporations and Facebook, and like, it's like these things that are held by the people who are using them. So
yeah, it's about making stuff rather than controlling stuff. I guess that's the fundamental difference. A lot of software is made to control what people do or surveil them. I don't want to go on too much of my trip. Yeah, but just showing that software can be is fundamentally human, and that if software is doing something bad to you, it's a person doing something. But if it's also doing something good to you, there's a person behind that as well. And it's a space that we can use to share stuff. And but I'd always like to try and think of this stuff as part of a longer history of people engaging with patterns and algorithms, thinking of algorithms as part of all our lives, whether we're making a cake and following a recipe, that's a kind of algorithm, or whether we just worked out our own workflow, that's another kind of algorithm that we're approaching. And especially if you look at stuff like textiles, which is just full of algorithms, like patterns or weaving structures, or all these things are full of mathematics and language and discrete relationships and stuff. Yeah, that's a whole other rant. But
yeah, I think as well, like people hear algorithm and they think it's something that's gonna replace humans in the kind of creative process. And like a lot of the press that I've seen around Algorave and the scene has been talking about it as like the future of dance music and like a way to replace DJs, which is just kind of backwards.
Yeah. Every 6 years, Wired magazine has written an article with saying, Algorave, the future of electronic music, or the DJs of the future will be coding. But that kind of assumes that actually there's something wrong with DJing, like playing pre-recorded music or mixing stuff together. Which, like 1210s are like fantastic technology, developed for longer than Tidal, and it's thinking that something as different as Tidal would ever be able to do something like a sequencer, even like you can do amazing things with Cubase that you could never do with Tidal, and it's all just different approaches, just trying to find different ways of doing things, but not necessarily better. But somehow journalists will have picked that tagline that something is going to.
In the end, it's another tool added to the arsenal of tools to make music.
Yeah,
totally.
100%.
And it's totally a continuum as well. Like you've talked about Max a lot, and that's totally a live coding system. It's just got a box and wire interface, but there's still words being composed together into computational structures, and that stuff's been around for ages as pure data as well. And early computer music stuff, there's always code underneath. I guess with live coding, we've just brought it together and made a sort of community around it, and made the kind of code something visible and maybe a bit tangible as a sort of creative material. But it's just like development of stuff that's happened before. Yeah.
Awesome.
Pretty good.
Yeah, really good stuff. I mean, I think we should. It's about 2 hours. I think we should wrap it up. Again, I've been ignoring the people in the comments. Talking about communities, we have a Discord server set up, where and the link should be in the comments or in the YouTube description. We basically use that as a hangout to talk more about these Knob Twiddlers hangouts with the people who are neglected. So if there's anybody who wants to continue talking to us, you, by the way, you were invited, Alex and Lizzie and Ben, to, if you have time, to hang out there. If not, it's fine. So yes, Discord service now, it's a growing thing. We now have about 600 people there, and it's becoming a really fun place. So I encourage you to take a look and join us there. So yeah, thank you all for joining. Is there any last thing you want to say? Maybe something you want to plug? Any projects you're working on, or something you want to share with the audience here?
Yeah, I can't think of any. We're going to have a Tidal 24-hour thing around the next new moon, which is mid-August.
Marathon, Tidal marathon.
Yeah, we're going to have non-stop online streams. That might be one way to sort of get in with the community.
Nice.
Yeah, try it out. See, yeah. But I should also say there's loads of other live coding systems like Foxdot, Ixilang. What else is there? Gibber.
Super Collider, I guess.
Super Collider as well. Yeah. There's a whole community around this stuff. So if you go to toplap.org, you can find all the other ones as well. Tidal's just one part of this jigsaw.
Cool.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks for making this and sharing it, and thanks for having us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's been a real privilege. Thanks for having fun.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, and I guess check out the albums we make when we lock ourselves in the room and force ourselves to actually write.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, everybody. Off to Discord and the Bandcamp pages of everybody here involved. So thanks a lot for joining, and see you later. Ciao, ciao.
Bye.